Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, March 31st, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps and steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Chancellor's Professor of Law and Political Science at the University of California, Irvine, Rick Hasen, author of Election Meltdown, Dirty Tricks, Distrust, and the Threat to American Democracy. Meanwhile, shelter-in-place restrictions seem to be working, and the CDC now contemplates masks for everybody. Phase 4 stimulus fight begins as the Fed estimates a potential 32% unemployment rate. Federal judge still insisting on holding dozens of immigrant families in Pennsylvania and Texas, of course, despite COVID-19 threat to them. The DOJ delivers the full Mueller report to a federal judge to review those redactions. Hungary takes another step towards dictatorship. And amidst a pandemic, the Idaho governor signs 2 bills discriminating against transgender folks. Meanwhile, labor actions, Whole Food employees stage a national sick out. GE workers protest to demand that they start producing ventilators. Amazon fires a strike organizing employee. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. It is another edition of us doing this show remotely. Thank you for joining us for it, ladies and gentlemen. We will endeavor to persevere. I hope everyone is doing okay. I imagine many of you are losing your minds. I think to a certain extent I am. This whole I read a piece, and Naomi Klein had tweeted it out. Just because it was so ridiculous. It was one in the Wall Street Journal talking about how there's so many folks out there who are learning the value of homeschooling now. And I can tell you, I am not one of those people. I think after this thing is over, one of the things that I'm learning is that, A, we should be doubling the salaries of our teachers. We should be adding at least 75% to our delivery people's pay. I mean, that's what I've learned from this. This whole homeschooling, guess what? If the parents are working, very difficult to pull off. And if they're not, very difficult to pull off. But aside from that, I need a place where I can ship bourbon into the home. So that's what I need. But aside from that, let's go on to our plugs and notices, shall we? Matt, are you ready with some? Okay, great. Barbara, Born Blue, writes us and says, I was confused about how to answer the census for my daughter, who is normally in college in another state, but living at home with this quarter due to COVID-19. The Census Bureau put out this helpful video to explain how students should be counted and specifically addresses the current situation. We will put that link in. It's a YouTube YouTube link, so check it out. It'll be in our plugs and notices 331, COVID-19 plugs and notices 331, youtube.com/Sam Cedar. I'm an organizer in Hudson County, New Jersey for the Mutual Aid Tenant Collective of Hudson County, or MATCH. We focus on doing mutual aid work in Hudson County as well as tenant organizing. We are looking for, in Hudson County, we are currently fundraising right now to help families struggling due to COVID-19 in Hudson County to get needed groceries and supplies, as well as making sure that we contact with residents that may be facing an illegal eviction during the pandemic. Details with donation links to our PayPal and Venmo can be found at the NJ Match, MATCH, Twitter handle. NJ Match Twitter, you can search on there. We have a direct link to it as well. That's from Colin. Becca says, I was wondering how to support my local bookstore, Auntie's Bookstore in Spokane, Washington. If you like audiobooks, you can support them through Libro.fm, Libro.fm. This is from Matt. And many independent bookstores may use Libro.fm as their audiobook service. Better than giving money to Bezos. Matt, that's for you. Some colleagues and I are working on getting our new telemedicine practice up and running, hopefully within a week or two. Most states are currently allowing telehealth across state lines without license in that state. Some require temporary license, but I anticipate we'll be able to serve most patients during the COVID crisis. If there are people in the MR or TMBS community struggling without insurance, underinsured, and can't afford copay, need basic medical attention, I'm willing to help out with care at no cost. We'll keep you posted, but it will start. I will also be available for telemedicine care on Amwell starting on Friday. That is amwell.com/CM to get in touch with Dr. Eric. So he'll keep us in touch with that telemedicine, but you can find amwell.com/CM. This is a company I contract for, so I have no discretion in terms of payment on this platform, but we will update you on Dr. Eric's plan to provide telemedicine. Meanwhile, Nick says, I want a shout out for a friend of mine, Max, who put together a Facebook group for Chester County, PA called COVID Assistance Network, Chester County, trying to connect with people who need assistance with local groups and just people who are willing to help during the crisis. That's a Facebook link. We've got it in our description. Hi, Sam. Thanks for sharing this information. Article and face shield link. Face shields I create, another way of creating face shields, and donation information that is about personal protective equipment from Stony Brook. That's from Andrew. Since workers are getting, somebody put in My Twin Tiers Health, a Texas company looking to dock paychecks for those receiving stimulus. I didn't get the full story on that. Oh, there it is. Yeah, someone wanted to put that in there. And then they were recommending, this is from Spencer, that we do Tequila Tuesdays, maybe. Matt says, for all the parents at home with their kids developing lesson plans, this is important. We're already starting to look on this. For all the parents at home, kids developing lesson plans, check out Pop Culture Classroom. It's popcultureclassroom.org. There are tons of free resources in lesson plans, including how to make comic books and or games, educational history comics, lesson plans to accompany popular age-appropriate graphic novels, et cetera, et cetera. Matt helped create some of these resources. Check that out. That's exciting for me in particular. We have a helpful CPA in Bronx. One of our listeners posted what they told them. It answers what benefits are there for individual taxpayers. They wrote out 6 different things, so you can check that out. I didn't create this website, says Matt, but I found it useful for tracking real-time coronavirus updates around the U.S. and Canada. That's coronavirus.1.3acres.com. Coronavirus1.3acres.com. Hi, MR Crew. I'm offering free tutoring for math and science courses using Zoom to help out students that need help getting through their online courses. Schedule is 3:30 to 5 through Monday through Friday. All you need to do is use this link. It's a Zoom link. We will post it. This is from Michael at michaelfuscotutor.com. michaelfuscotutor.com. And here's a plug from Shashank, I guess. The Shashank RK Studio does sheet music and piano tracks for needs like gigs, auditions, and practice. To support fellow artists like me have fallen on hard times, I'm offering commission-free sheet music for single instruments. These are massively discounted. You can go to shashankrkstudio.com. We will put a link to that as well. Those are our plugs and notices for 331. You can send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Put in the subject line plugs and notices, and we will play. We will do your plugs and notice. Meanwhile, I've been using grove.co. I've been hitting it hard, ladies and gentlemen, as of late. Aside from obviously the desire to get cleaning products right now, hand soaps, dish soaps, laundry material, et cetera, wipes when they're available. Grove.co, the Grove Collaborative. It curates all the highest quality, natural, non-toxic, sustainably sourced items that you need in your household. This is Grove Collaborative. It is the online marketplace, like I say, that delivers all natural home, beauty, and personal care products directly to you. Grove takes the guesswork out of going green because every Grove.co product is guaranteed to be good for you, your family, your home, and the planet. Obviously, Grove.co is the first place I went to get my hand soap, because as you know, I like to have, I have sensitive skin. I have sensitive smells. I've got I got 3 big things of Mrs. Meyer's laundry detergent there. And, because I don't want to open a lot of different boxes. They generally get it to you in about 48 hours. Right now, they're going about 4 or 5 days, I think. But they ship it right to you. They have just what you need to jumpstart your spring cleaning routine. They also tend to get some products in. They tend to sell out right now in this instance of things that you need less right now. But check it out. Hand soap, very important these days. And they have all the Mrs. Meyer's stuff. My favorite, I know this is going to sound weird, is the candy apple. I know, that's the one I like. Grove has just what you need, like I say, to jumpstart your spring cleaning routine. And you can join over 2 million households who have trusted Grove Collaborative to make their homes happier and healthier. Plus, shipping is fast and free on your first order. For a limited time, when listeners go to grove.co/majority, you're going to get a free 5-piece cleaning set from Mrs. Meyer's and Grove. Crisp scents like mint or rose, a $30 value. Go to grove.co/majority to get this exclusive spring cleaning offer. Grove.co/majority. No better time than to check out grove.co. They may have stuff there that you've been looking for, can't find anywhere else. And of course, they have all natural products, and they are supporting the show at a time where, businesses are hurting, and they cut back on their advertising revenues. So much appreciation from them. And it's a product, obviously, like everything that we advertise here, that I use. Do we have time? Yeah, we got time. Folks, this is a little bit of a upfront treat. there's a lot of course, a lot of questions that people have during a crisis like this. Tough to get information that you can count on. Um, the obviously, what's going on in New York is a horror show right now, and it's a horror show that is coming across the country. Yesterday, Donald Trump, or maybe it was 2 days ago, said it'll be a win if we, somewhere between 100,000, 200,000 deaths will be a big win. But there is some controversy as to what the real numbers are. So let's check in with the foremost public health experts, Diamond and Silk.
Matter of 2 weeks, over 1,000 people supposedly died from the coronavirus. In a 2 weeks time period, over 1,000 people, after being tested positive, have died from the coronavirus. But it took 39 days from January all the way up to February the 29th, I believe. That's
for the first person.
For the first person to die. Here's another thing.
Come on.
Here's another thing. My president said on March the 24th, Tuesday, this past week.
Wait, pause
My
it.
president said that he...
Pause it. What? What are they saying that since January? What that it took? I don't understand. Are they saying that that's suspicious because how did it take so long for people to die with coronavirus in this country if the first person had it in January?
They've sped up pretty quickly.
Or are they saying it took too long? Well, all right, go ahead. Keep playing. Oh, God.
On March the 24th, Tuesday, this past week, my president said that he would love for America to be back up and running.
I knew this was going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
I knew after he said this, this was going to happen. Go ahead.
At the time he said it, there was 25,489 cases with 307 deaths. Instantaneously, you had the media calling President Trump out. He wanted open by Easter. He want this open by Easter. Me and you were talking. I said, now watch the numbers of deaths go up.
Right.
Watch everything increase because they wanted to make it look bad.
That's right.
In front of our eyes. Here it is 5 days later. 5 days later as of yesterday. It jumped from 25,489 cases up to 121,478 cases. It went from 307 deaths to 2,026 deaths in 5 days. And the media is reporting that now the USA far supplies. We're #1 now with the number of cases.
This is fascinating to watch Diamond and Silk begin to understand the implications of a pandemic, and then, of course, say that it's all been made up. And, this is, on one hand, it's sort of hilarious. On another hand, it's sort of just one of the most effing disturbing things in the world. And part of the reason why I want to play this before this interview with Rick Hasen is that Hasen has written this book that contemplates different scenarios where the election could go awry in the fall. Of course, he wrote this before we had a global pandemic. But one of the things that makes the election so precarious in the fall is that there is I don't know how to put this, that there is a significant segment of the population that is politically engaged, that is bat crap crazy. And also, with all due respect to Diamond and Silk, incredibly stupid. I mean, I genuinely, I don't know. I mean, I pray on some level that Diamond and Silk are just running some type of scam because it suggests that maybe one day they could go like, maybe we shouldn't do this anymore. But it's also seems to me very possible that they genuinely believe what they're talking about, which is also terrifying. And certainly there are hundreds of thousands of right wingers who do. Who think of that like that's very suspicious. This highly contagious disease, which has a mortality rate anywhere from 7 to 10 times the flu, is exponentially growing in terms of its taking lives. That's highly suspicious. It must be a media story. And so if they can do this with that, what can they do with the results of an election? Well, I think you can imagine. And we will take a quick break and get in touch with Rick Hasen to find out what we're supposed to do about that. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Cedar on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program author of Election Meltdown, Dirty Tricks, Distrust, and the Threat to American Democracy. Also the Chancellor's Professor of Law and Political Science at the University of California, Irvine. Rick Hasen, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you.
When you wrote the book, you had contemplated a whole series of things that could go wrong with our election, and there's a new one. But I guess in some respects, the specifics might change under this scenario, and it's not a mutually exclusive thing, I guess. But the dynamic is, it seems to me, is pretty similar from what you had sort of, I guess, contemplated as a potential problem coming up in November.
Sure. So, what I think is that the coronavirus epidemic is only going to exacerbate the pathologies that I described in the book. What I'm looking at in Election Meltdown is why Americans' confidence in the election process is going down, why it is that people are worried that a good chunk of the country won't accept the 2020 election results as legitimate, regardless of who wins. And I talk about the use of voter suppression tactics by Republicans in a number of states that make it harder to register and vote, as undermining both Republican and Democratic confidence in the process. Republicans believing that Democrats are using voter fraud to steal elections, despite all evidence to the contrary, and Democrats believing that all of these laws are being passed to suppress the vote. Pockets of election administrator incompetence, dirty tricks
Right.
like misinformation spread by the Russians, and an increasingly incendiary rhetoric about stolen elections. And you add on top of that the kind of changes and last-minute problems that are inevitably going to arise if we're still in the throes of this pandemic in November, and it really is a recipe for lots of people to not trust that the election is going to be conducted fairly.
All right, so let's start just sort of like I guess maybe work backwards and touch on these four elements that you talk about, and I guess also the the sort of the exogenous issue of what could have been like a terrorist attack. I mean, nothing's off the table at this point, but certainly the coronavirus is, I think, likely to, in some way impact our voting. And I just want to touch on just what's happening in terms of these primaries, but we're talking sort of a different domain in some respects. Let's just start. And I know that we've actually talked about this a little bit on this program the past couple of weeks, but let's just work backwards in terms of a federal election, which is the presidential election as opposed to the primaries. A federal election. What are I guess the legal concepts, the controlling law, the precedent regarding federal elections and moving them, and who administers them, and who controls them?
Sure. So the Congress is given the power to set the time for the presidential election, and I believe it was an 1845 statute in which Congress set the time as the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, as well as a timetable for the counting of the electoral college votes. And then the Constitution provides that if it doesn't happen by basically January 20th, then we go with the order of succession that is put in place by Congress, and the president doesn't get to hold anything over. So, the idea that we would postpone the election, which I hear a lot about, that would be in Congress's domain. That's not to say that the president couldn't do things like use martial law or call for quarantines or do things that could keep people from going to the polling place. But in terms of actually moving the election date, that is something that would be beyond the president's power in the Constitution. In terms of the rules for conducting the election, when it comes to federal elections, Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution says that it is up to the states to set the rules for the manner of conducting congressional elections, but that is subject to congressional override. So, for example, in 1993, Congress passed the National Voter Registration Act, also known as the Motor Voter Law, and that law says that regardless of what a state's rules are for registering voters to vote in local and state elections, for congressional elections, you have to provide these other avenues for voting. And that's why, for example, DMVs have to offer voter registration in other public offices, and why there's a postcard that the federal government creates that can be used for voter registration and all of that. So if Congress wanted to, for example, as the Democrats have suggested, require every state to offer no excuse absentee balloting for November, Congress would have the power to do that if it wanted to do so. So that's kind of the basic overview of this.
So and by Congress, I mean they passed that law. The president would have to sign it, though.
Right, the president would have to sign it. Presumably, it would be in one of these coronavirus relief bills. We heard the president yesterday say that Democrats were asking for crazy things, and if one of those things, which was the no excuse absentee balloting, would have been included, no Republican would ever be elected to office again, which of course is untrue. We've had plenty of elections run by mail where Republicans are elected. Right, but the idea is the only way that Democrats could politically get something like this through is if it were part of the package of relief efforts that are being passed by Congress, kind of must-pass bills that the president would have to sign. I guess that Pelosi could not get this included in the final bill that was what they're calling phase 3, but she was on, I think it was Morning Joe this morning, saying that she still thinks it needs to happen. So maybe they're going to try again for phase 4.
Well, I hate to be a cynic, but one, let's put a pin in that because I want to return to sort of that dynamic about the Democrats when it comes to voting, and two, I would say if I had to bet right now that somehow the override to the SALT exclusion that was in the last tax bill, I have a feeling is going to be higher on the priority list than that, which is a shame. But that is neither here nor there in terms of this conversation. But I couldn't help myself. So with that said, and we should also add, right, um, that governors in specific states have that same ability that Trump does nationally insofar as the election's happening. However, I'm doing a lockdown of this, let's say this, that just so happens to coincide with this congressional district that is heavily African American, let's say, or Milwaukee has a stay at home order on election day, right? I mean, theoretically, I don't know that Evers would do that, but theoretically that could be done.
Sure, right. So this is a concern in states. Maybe it's unlikely to happen given that the election is going to be going on, or there would be an exception to it. But governors have the public health power, and we saw this in Ohio when, you may remember, a few weeks ago we were supposed to have 4 primaries: Ohio, Illinois, Florida, and Arizona. And then a couple of days before the Ohio primary was supposed to happen, the governor, DeWine, tried to get a court to order him to delay the election because he didn't think he had the power to do so under the state constitution. The court refused to do that, and then he still thought he had to delay the election, so he had his public health officer close the polling places. At that point, the Secretary of State issued an order delaying the election. There's disagreement as to whether or not that complied with Ohio state law. The legislature later came in and came up with a new set of guidelines for how the election is going to take place, and there's now litigation over those guidelines. But that, of course, is in the primary when the timing is much less important. You're right that something happened in a particular state where people could not get to the polls. It's going to be a real problem. That's why my advice to everyone is, to the extent that there is the ability to vote absentee, it's the kind of thing you should take advantage of. And in about 2/3 of the states, there's no excuse absentee balloting. The problem is getting people to apply for those absentee ballots and getting those ballots to them and getting them returned, which is not an easy thing. Not even to talk about the difficulties of counting a huge number of absentee ballots that might come in.
And I want to get to some of the limitations on voting by mail as well. Although I think when we get more into like a solution or a fix, particularly in this context, and then before we get to the sort of like 4 different categories, you also make the point in the book that it is our the Electoral College, and I hadn't contemplated this, and which I think is not necessarily the most democratic way to elect a president, but it also creates a sort of it makes the system more vulnerable to all of the things that you lay out here, because you don't have to change the vote totals in such a massive way because we don't have a popular vote. But in fact, you can do something very targeted. I mean, you could literally turn a federal election based upon 1 or 2 counties theoretically in the country.
Well, I actually think it's much worse than that. And this has gotten very little attention nationally so far, which is that if you remember back in Bush versus Gore, the Supreme Court case that ended the 2000 election,
I do.
The Supreme Court included a line in its opinion that said the Constitution gives state legislatures the power to choose the manner of picking presidential electors in the state. And although every state has given that power to the voters, a state legislature can come back at any time and take that power back. And so one of the nightmare scenarios I worry about is suppose that there are widespread closures in Philadelphia. And a few days before the election, the Republicans in the state legislature decide, we don't think we can conduct a fair election because there are so many closed polling places. We're just going to appoint the electors ourselves, and we appoint them to Trump. I think that would be constitutional. I think there would be rioting in the streets, but I think that would be constitutional. So this is one of the many problems with the Electoral College. It's profoundly undemocratic. It's been made more democratic by political decisions that have been made, but those decisions could be reversed under the Constitution.
And so we have like sort of the both the sort of the structural flaws that make it more vulnerable, and then just sort of the design itself is a bit of a disaster waiting to happen. So all right, let's talk about the supposed election security methods that that end up in many respects sort of destabilizing the vote in some way.
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, you write that there are four, one of the things that you talk about these election security methods, and it undermines the confidence in the election.
So I was talking mostly about election administrator incompetence. So when there's a very close election, even if 95, 98% of the election administrators have done a very good job conducting the election, if it's very close, the attention focuses immediately on the places where there are problems. And there are pockets in the United States, both run by Democrats and run by Republicans, where elections are administered really poorly. One example of this, the city of Detroit, where you may remember Jill Stein in 2016, after the presidential election, asked for recounts in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. All of those ended up getting aborted after a while. But when they tried to do the recount in Detroit, there were so many errors in how poll workers tried to count the ballots by putting them through these ballot tabulating machines that they couldn't even conduct the recount in part of Detroit, because Michigan state law said that if the vote totals don't match, what you've written down and what's in the machine, then you can't do a recount. And so there was a later investigation by the Michigan Secretary of State's office, which found that there was no intentional foul play, although there were lots of accusations of that on Fox News and elsewhere, but massive incompetence. And so, in terms of voter confidence, what happens if, let's say, it's the election comes down to Michigan and Trump is ahead by 3,000 votes because there are 6,000 absentee ballots that have been rejected in Milwaukee because of purported signature mismatches. We're going to fight over people's signatures. How is all of that going to work? And so I really worry that, in a very close election, the public's confidence can be severely undermined by these places where there is incompetent election administration. And one of the things I called for in a piece that I had in Slate yesterday is that there needs to be more state control over these weak links. States need to assert greater control to make sure that these weak areas of election administration are getting the support they need and getting the leadership they need to actually be able to conduct a fair election in November.
I get so let me go back to the security, the election security stuff. Like for instance, voter ID. It is you write that it's not as disenfranchising as some of us might believe it is, but this again undermines confidence in the elections, both for Democrats and for Republicans. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So the voter ID laws are supposedly put in place to prevent voter fraud, but the kind of voter fraud that voter ID laws would prevent is where people would go to the polling place and claim to be someone who's either dead or moved and vote their ballot, and that this would happen on a large enough scale that you could actually try to swing an election. It doesn't happen. We don't have, lots of modern cases of organized efforts to do this because it is a very inefficient a way to try to steal an election. You'd have to send people to the polling places. They'd have to pretend to be other people. uh, and you'd have to hope that the poll workers wouldn't know, oh, that's the name of my neighbor who's moved or who's died. You'd have to pay these people to go in and commit this felony and pay them even though you can't verify how they would have voted. That's why I think if Republicans who suggested these laws were really concerned about fraud, they would focus much more on absentee ballots. Historically, they've not focused on that because Republicans have tended to use absentee ballots more. But now we're seeing with this new Pelosi move to try to expand absentee balloting, a newfound focus on this kind of fraud. Now, in terms of the disenfranchising effects of voter ID, the studies are mixed, but they tend to show that they don't have a very large effect on turnout. This is probably true for a few different reasons. One is that there are lots of countermeasures that are taken when a state comes in and passes one of these laws to try to ensure that the people who want to vote can get the ID. Also, people who lack IDs are people who are probably least likely to vote. The poorest, most unconnected people in society who lack this ID are also people who are not going to show up and vote. And so, if you look at that measure in particular, voter ID laws, there does not seem to be a big effect on turnout. That doesn't make them legitimate. In fact, I think focusing on whether it turns elections or affects turnout should really be secondary to the question of why does the state get to make it harder for people to register and vote without providing a real good reason? And the state generally provides the reasons of preventing voter fraud or promoting voter confidence, and we know that that these laws don't actually do that. But there are other kinds of laws, and I write in Election Meltdown about a Kansas law that required people to provide documentary proof of citizenship, like a birth certificate or a naturalization certificate, in order to be able to register and vote. We know that law in Kansas had disenfranchised 30,000 people before a federal court had come in and put an injunction in place to prevent that law from being enacted, or to prevent that law from being enforced, I should say. And so when you think about the variety of laws that might suppress the vote, lots of focus on voter ID laws, but I actually think there are many other laws, exact match laws, voter purges, things that probably have a larger effect than voter ID in particular.
And I imagine too, though, I mean, that the efforts that are put into dealing with voter ID, right? The people come in, groups come in, and they get people these IDs. They spend a lot of manpower and money that theoretically could be deployed in driving out the vote in other areas. I mean, theoretically, but all of this is the fact that the state can abridge this right to vote is a function of, I guess, the failure of the 15th Amendment, right? To sort of to be an affirmative, to rather than constrain the states specifically how they can abridge the vote, as opposed to just saying there is a constitutional right to vote.
Yeah, right. I think that's right, and I also think that lots of these laws, like voter ID laws, end up deterring people from voting because they create a lot of confusion. And so, you see even in states where voter ID laws have been put on hold or where they've been loosened, poll workers don't always get the message, or voters. There's a lot of survey evidence that voters misunderstand voter ID laws. Lots of voters who actually have an ID that would qualify don't think they do, and that could deter them from voting. Or you can think about this ongoing controversy in Florida over Florida's felon disenfranchisement law. Voters in Florida a few years ago passed an amendment to the state constitution that re-enfranchised former felons from voting. The state legislature came back and said, well, you can only vote unless you can't vote if you're a former felon unless you've paid all your fines and fees. And there's no repository in the state. So you can't, if you're a former felon, you can't just check a database and find out if you owe any money. You might owe $15 in court costs somewhere from something 20 years ago, and you'd have to sign a piece of paper under penalty of perjury that you have no fines or fees against you related to your convictions. there's now a bunch of lawsuits, and those requirements could well be put on hold for November. But all of these laws that make it harder to register and vote, all of these impediments that are put up create lots of confusion among voters and poll workers, and that itself has a deterrent effect on who turns out to vote.
Let's talk about general dirty tricks. I mean, what constitutes dirty tricks, and are we in an era where those tricks have gotten dirtier?
Well, there have been dirty tricks associated with American elections for as long as we've had elections. We've had tires slashed and phone lines jammed and all kinds of things in the past that try to make it harder for people to get people to the polls, or to get out the vote, or misdirecting people to the wrong polling place and things like that. Back in 2012, I had a book called The Voting Wars, and I have a picture in there of a flyer that was distributed at dorms at the University of Wisconsin telling people to vote at the polling place of their choice, when in fact, if you would have gone to any polling place but the one you were assigned, your vote wouldn't count. But now we have kind of newfangled dirty tricks in the form of social media misinformation. We saw the Russians doing it in 2016, but you don't need the Russians to do it anymore. There are plenty of Americans who are willing to engage in spreading misinformation, and I think certainly during the time of the coronavirus, it's possible to spread misinformation related to the virus that could keep people from the polls. Telling people don't go to the polling place because you can get infected from the machines, or polling places are closed or moved, or all kinds of things. I think we really have to be on the lookout for that kind of false information. And spreading it over social media means that you can have a lot more of an impact than you would, and you could do this from anywhere in the world, unlike the situation I described with those flyers that someone had to walk over to the dorms at the University of Wisconsin-Madison to distribute these flyers, and maybe they got into people's hands, maybe they didn't. It's possible for social media, for relatively little effort, to reach thousands and thousands of people. So I am concerned, especially about the use of social media to spread misinformation related to the election coming up.
And you also talk about a scenario, and I don't know if this falls into dirty tricks, but the of a foreign power hacking into our power grid, and because of the nature of our elections, making it impossible to vote in Detroit, let's say, and then what do we do?
Right. So this was one of my top nightmare scenarios pre-coronavirus in the book Election Meltdown. And one of the things that I urge at the end of that book is that more states need to have a plan B in case there is a disruption of the election. And, that is still true today, even though states are now on notice that there could be disruptions of the election, whether it's natural disaster or some kind of foreign attack. Many states have not done anything to provide, here, what would happen if people could not get to polling places in Detroit on election day? What's the procedure going to be? How is this going to be dealt with? And these things, I've been arguing this for over 20 years. These kinds of last minute emergencies really create a legitimacy problem for elections, because if you have to make decisions at the time of the actual emergency, you're much more likely to know who the winner and loser of your decision might be. Much better in advance, behind the veil of ignorance, to set fair election rules that would apply in the event of an emergency. And yet, states are doing almost nothing. I was amazed that I think it was 2 weeks ago, the Kentucky legislature decided to continue meeting despite the coronavirus orders, across the country for people to stay at home and not gather in large groups. They decided to get together and still pass legislation, and they passed a strict voter identification law, but they did not take any action to try to deal with the kind of emergencies that could disenfranchise people and create problems with how the election is run. And
Well, why?
now we're really paying the price.
But why? I mean, you've been doing it. Why has there been, after 2000 in particular, why has there been such an absence of addressing this either on a federal level, or, I mean, it's been shocking to witness this, that what we went through in 2000, and that over the course of whatever it was, 16 years, we couldn't come up with a better way of codifying this stuff. Why is it that seems to be this sort of allergy towards dealing with this issue?
Well, it's baffling to me. There, it's the same reason we don't have, plans for remote voting right now in Congress. I just, it is, political leaders are not willing to deal with these issues sometimes until it is too late. And this is not a Republican Democratic issue, right? So Nancy Pelosi is not allowing remote voting in the House. Not even doesn't want to have a conversation about it, even though I think there were reports this morning of 2 more House members that are presumably positive for the virus. It's really a problem. I remember back, some of your listeners may remember in 2003, we had a recall in California. We recalled Governor Gray Davis, replaced him with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And in that election, the reason there were 135 candidates on the ballot was because there was a kind of a glitch in how the recall rules were written. They were internally contradictory, and the state Secretary of State of California read it one way, which basically said if you got 65 signatures and $3,000, you could get on the ballot. And California still hasn't fixed that, right? So even after problems happen, it's very hard to get legislators to be focused on emergency plans, maybe in part because they would rather wait and see what might benefit them as
Right.
it might get closer to an emergency. But it really is baffling to me.
It's nuts. And then you also cite incendiary rhetoric, which is basically, and I think we can talk about 2016 in this context, but I imagine it, on some level, it goes both ways at this point. Donald Trump saying, the election's rigged, or anybody, saying the election is rigged and therefore the outcome is not correct, and how people will take that. I was fascinated by and I hadn't heard this about the Obama contingency plan. If Clinton had won and Trump did not accept the results, will you talk about that? Because this, I think it's illustrative of a problem that the Democrats have. But explain what that was.
Well, first, the reason we care about this rhetoric is that this should be too obvious to even have to say, but a democracy depends upon the losers of the election accepting the election results as legitimate, believing that the vote totals were correct, and being upset about losing, but saying, all right, well, it was a fair fight. I'm going to fight another day. Hopefully we'll win the next time. If you lose that, you lose your very democracy, if people believe that election results are being rigged or stolen. And in 2016, the Obama administration was concerned enough that Trump would not accept a result. He even said he would only accept the results, or he would accept the results if he won the election. Kind of joking, always half joking about these kinds of things. And so the Obama administration was prepared to trot out people like Colin Powell to say, no, the election was done fair and square, and and people need to accept the results and move on. And it almost seems quaint now to think that the base of the Republican Party would accept Colin Powell over the words of Donald Trump as as the voice of reason. But I also think it is not just Donald Trump who's the problem. And so I think that I'm very concerned with the language surrounding the loss that Stacey Abrams had in running for governor against Brian Kemp in 2018. Brian Kemp, remember, was the Secretary of State running for governor, so he was running in his election. He did some terrible things, and I described those terrible things in Election Meltdown. But there was no good evidence that what he did actually swung the election against Abrams, and she would have won otherwise. And yet you had Senator Sherrod Brown saying the election was stolen. And I think that kind of rhetoric is really dangerous. It should be reserved for situations where you can actually prove that that an election would have come out a different way. And certainly fine to call Kemp a vote suppressor. Certainly fine to point out that he was both incompetent and evil in how he ran his election. I think he did some terrible things. But when you start talking about stolen elections, and you start talking about elections being rigged, I think you undermine the very democracy that we need to preserve right now, especially in these kinds of times.
But I mean, how do we deal with this, right? I mean, because the idea of we're going to bring out Colin Powell, and I mean, that to me just seems like such an anemic response to what would have been a massive problem. Like, everybody loves Colin Powell. Maybe we can get, I don't know, some other celebrity to come out and say, everybody just calm down and accept the results here. Um, and I feel like that impulse was also driving Al Gore in some respects to sort of stand down in Florida in 2000. And what is what I mean, one of the things that I think the going into the impeachment of Donald Trump struck me was that this plan was not, it seems to me, and maybe I'm curious as to your perspective on it. The idea of going and digging up Burisma and this and that was only sort of part of the plan. The other part of the plan, assuming that they had never been caught like they were, was to make it as if Ukraine was interfering with our elections and set up almost an insurance policy that, you tell me if you think this is wild conjecture, that Bill Barr could say on November, whatever it is, 4th or 5th, the day after the election, like, if we have evidence that Ukrainians interfered in this election, that's why Joe Biden won. And therefore, I'm going to the Supreme Court to contest this election. I mean, how batty is that scenario?
Well, I don't know that, Bill Barr saying that would be the thing. I mean, I think it would be Trump claiming victory when he's lost is what I'm worried about. A much more plausible scenario is that there's a flood of absentee ballots, whether coronavirus is raging or not. There's a flood of absentee ballots in Michigan and Pennsylvania, which now both, for the first time, allow no excuse absentee balloting. And Trump's ahead on election night, and he claims that the votes are being fraudulently counted in Philadelphia and in Detroit, and that's what ends up eventually giving him the victory. And then there's a fight in Congress over whose electoral college votes get to count. I mean, I think that's a much more plausible way that this happens than trying to blame foreign sources for interfering in the election, unless Bill Barr would have evidence that vote totals will have changed. One of the advantages of our hyper decentralized system is that which I don't favor the hyper decentralized system, but one advantage is that there's decentralized vote counts. You'd really have to point to problems in particular states that would have done it. If it's the Ukrainians spread misinformation, well, we already had something like that in 2016, and that didn't change election results. So there's lots of nightmare scenarios, lots of ways in which there could be claims that the election was not fairly conducted and not counted, and people shouldn't accept election results. But they wouldn't necessarily require foreign interference as a hook to try and do that.
Right. So how do we inoculate ourselves against, I guess, do we inoculate ourselves against specific ones like the one you're talking about, or are there inoculations that we can get in terms of like the broad problem?
Well, I think the problems, the places where voter confidence can be undermined, cut across different areas. There's a role for the media to play. There's a role for state election administrators to play. There's a role for the general public to play in terms of demanding that transparency from election administrators. I'm actually part of an ad hoc group that I hope in about a month will be releasing about 20 specific things that could be done to try to deal with this problem and to minimize the chances that we would have this kind of election overtime fight over who actually won the election in 2020, because it would be much more brutal than what we saw in the 2000 election between Bush and Gore.
Let's play out your scenario. Trump says, I'm the winner. This whole thing is very suspicious that they found new votes in Detroit or something, or they found new votes in Milwaukee, or they found new votes in Philadelphia. That's very suspicious. I'm not I'm the president. Like, then what happens?
Well, I think then, at least legally, what would happen is the election results would be reported. There would be a certificate saying who won the electoral college votes. In a really bad scenario, there could be more than one certificate. It would go to Congress, and there would be a fight in Congress as to how the electoral college votes should be counted and who would be declared the president. There's a whole set of convoluted rules that Congress created after the disputed 1876 election that would come into play. Some of those rules could be challenged as unconstitutional. We could well see the issue go back before the Supreme Court, or there's lots of ways that it could play out in that would either be decided by political branches or by courts as to who the winner of the election would be. It's one of those things that is really hard to game out because there's lots of different ways that it could go.
Is the broadly speaking, the legal institutions, you're on a task force to deal. Is this a task force that is like contemplating this type of question? Are there lawyers gathering in in conference rooms saying, hey, in the event that this happens, we need to do X, Y, or Z?
Right. So we're trying to do that, but a lot of these things are pointing out what the problems are, and the only one that could fix some of these problems with the way the Electoral College votes work is Congress, and I don't see Congress tackling them anytime before November. There's a limit to what can be done in time for November. It's not as though we in the election law community haven't been pointing out these problems for years. As we talked about earlier, this been an ongoing problem, and our leaders have their heads in the sands, and they are not looking at what it would take to ensure that we have fair and clear procedures in place to deal with disputes like this.
Rick Hasen, thank you so much for giving us something different to worry about.
Yeah, well, it's always good to have variety, I guess.
Exactly. The book is Election Meltdown, Dirty Tricks, Distrust, and the Threat to American Democracy. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye. Well, there you go, folks. It's like the strategy of, my ankle hurts. Oh, okay. Well, let me hit your finger with a hammer. And so now you're not thinking about your ankle. This is what next, right? All right, we are going to take a quick break and head to the fun half. And Nomiki Konst is going to be joining me in the fun half, live from Arizona, which reminds me, you can check out the Nomiki Show at patreon.com/the Nomiki Show, and also Nomiki Konst on YouTube, youtube.com/Nomiki Konst. Just a reminder, this program relies on your support. When you become a member, you keep this show cruising along. It's tough time that we're all headed into. If you do not have the financial resources to become a member and want access to the full show, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Give us a little time. We will get to it. And if you're one of those people who can afford to support the show at this time, this would be a great time to do it. We've got members who are losing their jobs. We've got advertisers that are cutting back. So any support you can give us at this time, greatly appreciated. Also, don't forget, check out justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. Get 10% off. And the AM Quickie is now on YouTube. I posted to YouTube, and there's like a little graphic. Bullprog did the animation for that, right, Brendan? Got Bullprog did the image of myself and Lucy, and you can check that out on YouTube, or you can just sign up for it at amquickie.com. That's a great way to do it as well. Don't forget TMBS tonight. You can see that at youtube.com, The Michael Brooks Show, patreon.com/TMBS. Also, Jamie's been putting out new antifadas. You can find that at patreon.com/The Antifada. And Matt, what's up with Literary Hangover?
Literary Hangover is recording again tomorrow night, and that will be out on Saturday The Widow Ranter by Afro Ben. We're going to be talking about gender and Bacon's Rebellion. So look forward to that. Also, I was on the Surf's Twitch channel last night. People said people were really loving it, just going crazy over there. So you can check that out as well.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half, try and get to some calls. We may not, and but we'll see. 646-257-3920. We'll be right back. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
we are back. It's the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Joining me, Nomaki Const. She is she's still getting her set up, but she, like I could step into this situation. I got the whole thing set up. It takes me just about 5 minutes now. But it's going to take a little time for Nomaki to get. Nomaki, welcome.
Hi.
Now, I got to ask you this question because I saw a video of you. You're in Arizona. You'd mentioned to us last week. You were headed to get tested. You got tested because you're with your mom, who has a compromised immunity system. And you had been to all sorts of different events in the days prior to the stay-at-home order that suggested you had been exposed. So what's the deal?
So I was trying to be responsible before I flew out here. It was a little over 2 weeks ago, right? It was the day after they declared it a global pandemic. My mom called me up and she said, I'm going to your grandparents' house in Arizona. I think it'll be calmer for me. I can work from home. She has cancer. So she was like, could you come out and help me out? And I said, well, I don't know. I was just a few days ago. Before that, I was in Westchester County in the containment zone, which at that time was an active containment zone. I was there for a baby shower, and everybody at that time was going around just bumping elbows, and we thought that was good enough. The rules were changing by the moment, and I called up. I mean, it was a pain in the butt. I called up like the New York Department of Health, the New York City Department of Health to try to get proper instruction about whether or not I should get on the plane. I'd also been on like 3 or 4 flights, maybe even more, I think, at that point, within the week prior. So I had been around a lot of people. I've been at rallies. I've been shaking hands with. It was not a good week to be. There was no self-containment on my end. So I was nervous about getting on the plane and exposing other people, and possibly exposing my mother. And so I came out here and I felt fine. And then a couple of days in, I started to get, I was waking up with fevers, and I got the chills, and then I started to get shortness of breath. The only thing I didn't get was a cough. And so I just plugged away. And then it finally got to the point where in Arizona at that time, the caseload was not as heavy. And so I think because they screened me, they asked me a million questions. Was I, did I have symptoms? Had I been in contact with anybody who had COVID? And at this point, yeah, a lot of people I know have COVID, and I was in contact with several of them in the week prior. Several, 3 or 4. So I was very worried. And then I went through this crazy system here in Arizona. I even went to go get tested. And then when I got to the clinic, they denied me because I had out-of-state insurance. So it was, it was a little bit messy, and I ended up getting the results and I'm negative, but my mom did get sick. So we don't know what I had or what she had. She was a little bit more sick than I was, and she's just getting over it.
Oh, that's good.
So, it wasn't COVID. It might've just been the flu, because it is flu season.
All right. Yeah, there it is. I mean, but I'm glad that there's that she's out of the woods and you're out of the woods. So that's good. But one of the things that apparently is the case, that there may be a diminished number of flu deaths this year because of this social distancing that people are doing, and the flu is harder to contract than COVID-19. And so there's still some data extant on that. I sent you a little IM about maybe the headset. See if that works. It might work for you. In the meantime, let's play this audio. It is somehow CBS News got a hold of a phone call. I am going to bet that the call came from the Montana side, not so much the Trump side. And it is between Montana Governor Steve Bullock and Donald Trump. And apparently, Donald Trump is the only person in the country who is aware of the fact that we are lacking tests in this country. Play this clip.
Do you have any system in place that you feel can adequately identify cases and isolate them and contact trace them, or the capabilities and resources there that's not something that you can do given with what you have?
Yes, Dr. Fauci, we are trying to do contact tracing, but literally we are one day away if we don't get test kits from the CDC that we wouldn't be able to be tested in Montana. We have gone time and time again to the private side of this, the private market, and where the private market is telling us is that it's the national resource that are then taking our orders apart. So we're getting our orders canceled. And that's for PPE, that's for testing supplies, that's for testing equipment. So while we're trying to do all the contact tracing, we don't have adequate tests to necessarily do it. We don't have the PPE along the way, and we're not finding markets to be able to do that along the way, or private suppliers. So we do have to rely on a national chain of distribution, or we're not going to get it. But we are doing our best to try to do exactly that. In Gallatin County would be an example where we have almost half of our overall states, those are the positives. So we're trying to shift the supplies to really isolate that and do the contact tracing, but we just don't have enough supplies to do the testing.
Tony, you can answer it if you want, but I haven't heard about testing in weeks. We've tested more now than any nation in the world. We've got these great tests, and we come out with another one tomorrow where it's, almost instantaneous testing. but I haven't heard about testing being a problem.
Boom.
Wow.
He's just doing that because he knows there are other people listening, right? I mean, he's just lying.
I don't know. I mean, we have more cases than China at this point.
But I mean,
This is insane.
he's got to be lying about not being aware of the testing failures.
Of course, but I don't know if it's just because people are listening or if he's just delusional.
Right.
Or both.
That is right. It's the classic evil or stupid, but why choose one
Right.
scenario with Donald Trump trying to pretend like Dr. Fauci, this is on you, sort of, right?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And, you know, there was a story that came out. We still don't know why they rejected the test that they could have had at the beginning, why it was necessary for the United States to develop its own tests when there was already the World Health Organization already had these tests. My conjecture remains that it was somebody, they thought somebody was going to get the contract. It turned out that Jared Kushner, apparently his family heavily involved in Oscar, the company that ultimately was like given a contract to start up one of the websites that never got started up that Trump had talked about early on. But and incidentally, Donald Trump said that we are what did he say? We've done more tests than anybody.
Right.
That, of course, is not well, it's not true, but it's also not the measure. It's really relative to your population. Here is the number of tests performed per 100,000 people as of 3:30, which was yesterday when this conversation took place. Let's start up at the top. Iceland, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Norway, Switzerland, Malta. I'm just reading off the countries that have the more tests per capita than the United States. Slovenia, Australia, Estonia, South Korea, Spain, Latvia, Italy, Singapore, Germany, Canada, Cyprus, Austria, Denmark, Israel, Czechoslovakia, is that what that says? Portugal, Ireland, Lithuania, Finland, Netherlands, United States.
Mm-hmm.
There we are. We're number 18. Is that what it is? How many? What number are we? There's a one in that. There's a one. What is it?
I think 27.
27?
Wow.
Oh, well, then there's a 2 in it.
I'd be curious to see when, I mean, the other factor here is, and I'm not defending Donald Trump, let me make that very clear, but the other factor here is, okay, so they're further along in their crises in Spain and in Czech, in Europe, in all areas of Europe. So, you know, I'd be curious to see when they got their tests, the supply of tests. Of course, it was earlier on in the crisis as well. So there was probably a bigger delay for other reasons than, you know, a president refusing to take tests because he might get a deal for one of his cronies. So just be interesting to match it.
I believe that we had the first case in the same day that Italy did.
Oh, wow.
That's my understanding. Maybe it was the first death.
Right.
But we certainly were matching up with Italy on some of it. I mean, this is such a I mean, I don't know. I'm of two minds of this. Well, first off, I'm of three minds. One, I generally don't care about Mike Francesa at all. And Francesa at all. This guy's a sports, he's a sports radio talker, right?
Right. That's all I know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like the New York guys anyways, but he has been a huge Trump supporter. And I'm of two minds of this. One, if this is getting through to other people, or two, if it's just because New York is being hit so hard. But here he is, longtime defender of Donald Trump, basically, calling out Trump for the barrage of lies and failures.
He basically yesterday accused the hospital of padding the numbers they need because they were trying to sell or sending out the back door the masks. How do you go from using 20,000 masks to 300,000 masks? Can't be done. Go investigate that. You go investigate that. You have your military or FEMA investigate that. That's your job. You're in charge of this. If this is a war, they're stealing your supplies. What do? You tell them, you tell the media to go investigate it? What, and get back to you in 6 weeks or 2 months as more people die on a daily basis? Wow. That's what's wrong here. There's a disconnect. We're watching one thing happen in our city on the 11 o'clock news every night. We're watching people die, and now we know people who died. And we're not seeing 1 or 2 people die now in our neighborhood. We're seeing them die by the 10s and 20s by the day. They're bringing people out of the hospital in Queens in body bags, 5 minutes from where he grew up. We here know this isn't right. You get the guys in the metropolitan area and ask the cops in New York if it's right now. Ask the firemen in New York who are answering those police calls, answering those ambulance calls if it's right now. Ask the nurses and the doctors in that hospital if it's right now. They know it's not. They don't have the supplies they need. So don't give me the My Pillow guy doing a song and dance up here on a Monday afternoon when people are dying in Queens. Get the stuff made, get the stuff where it needs to go, and get the boots on the ground. Treat this like the crisis it is. And how can you have a scoreboard that says 2,000 people have died and tell us it's okay if another 198,000 die? That's a good job. Mm-hmm. How is that a good job in our country? It's a good job if nobody else dies. Not if another 198,000 people die. So now 200,000 people are disposable?
So now, of course, everybody remembers Francesa's ripping into Donald Trump in his response to Hurricane Maria on Puerto Rico. I mean,
FEMA, right?
It's classic sort of a conservative mindset where suddenly they become aware of an issue when it impacts them more directly. But be that as it may, it's good to have, sort of other sources validating the reality of what's going on and the failure that Donald Trump has been involved in.
And he brought up an interesting point, which I think if organizers want to be strategic in some way, or reporters even, the police department and the fire department have had, I don't even know what the case count is at this point, but an extraordinary number of cases come in. And with the police department in particular, the police union in New York is extremely powerful and very conservative, and has basically held Governor Mayor de Blasio hostage for the last several years since he's been in office. But Donald Trump, these are his conservatives. These are the types of conservatives he responds to. They're the ones he knows. He shows up there at their big luncheon every year. He's very close with the commissioner. That's where the pressure points, I think, where he's going to start to respond. And honestly, where like Fox News is going to start, turning on Trump as well, because they have longtime relationships with, Bernie, what's that guy's name? Bernie
Carrick?
Carrick, yeah, that guy. They have him on Fox, and he advises Trump. That's like the core of who Trump is. It's not the evangelicals and the My Pillow guy. It's the New York police union guys. And when they turn on Trump, I think that's going to hit him in a different way. You have to think like, how do you get into Trump's brain? So he does things like save people's lives. It's absolutely ridiculous that we have to think this way, but.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe if somebody mentions it to him directly, but I don't know. I think he is the My Pillow guy. I was telling Matt that when I covered a debate in Vegas, longtime listeners will remember I had an exchange with James O'Keefe at that time. And what they do at this debate, and I didn't see this at other debates, but who knows? They in the press room, in the sort of the spin room, they created basically this, I don't know what you would call it. You could call it maybe a corral. And the subjects for interviews walked into the corral and then would go to the edge and interview, and journalists would be up there holding their microphones out. And so they'd sort of walk around. I mean, it's guess very similar to what you see at like a red carpet event type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike Lindell was there. The My Pillow guy was walking in with Trump.
What?
He was part of the travel crew, and Lindell has been a right-wing guy for a long time. He was an early advertiser on WABC, good friends with Sean Hannity.
Mm-hmm.
And here he is now. He's a multimillionaire. He's been selling his pillows. And here is Mike Lindell, the pillow guy, addressing the country, I guess, about coronavirus to tell us how great Donald Trump is. And it's quite clear that Trump is getting Lindell to, I think he's trying to get him to run for governor in Minnesota.
Oh my God.
And so this is Trump saying, I want you to run in Minnesota. Come on to my, TV show that I do every day now. I'm getting great ratings. Come on. And here it is. Here is My Pillow. At the very least, you're going to sell a bunch of pillows, and then maybe you run for governor.
Gave us grace on November 8, 2016, to change the course we were on. God had been taken out of our schools and lives. A nation had turned his back on God. And I encourage you to use this time at home to get back in the Word, read our Bibles, and spend time with our families. Our president gave us so much hope where just a few short months ago, we had the best economy, the lowest unemployment, and wages going up. It was amazing. With our great president, vice president, and this administration, and all the great people in this country praying daily, we will get through this and get back to a place that's stronger and safer than ever.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Please come on up. I did.
Yeah, I was going to give people a chance to come up and, praise me and maybe get a little, from their business. So there you go.
You're right. This is a television show for him. He didn't do press conferences for how long, and now he suddenly realized, maybe I should have done this. It would have been my daily show.
I'm like Dean Martin. It's fantastic. It's like Dean Martin, just like Dean. Calling from a Skype number overseas. Who's this?
Hello, this is Matthew calling from London. Can you hear me?
Yes. Nomi, can you hear him?
I can hear him.
Okay. Matthew, what's on your mind?
Brilliant. I've got a couple of things, but, deal with them as you want to. First thing, don't really want you to respond to it now, but we shouldn't celebrate just because this crisis is happening, that Trump's ratings will go down. Boris Johnson's ratings have gone up and so have Trump's. In a crisis, people look for certainty and they want to believe that the leader has a clue. Now, we both know that's not true in this case, but it'll take a while for people to realize that the crisis is being mishandled.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say this, that if you look at the polling, every leader who has been hit by this, their polling numbers have shot up. Now, Donald Trump's has not gone up as much as most, but he is at his highest approval rating since becoming president.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. The wanting to believe that your leader has the country's best wishes at heart is a completely normal thing for even, Democrats to believe. The other thing I just wanted to warn you to look out for is that you should not rely too heavily on the deaths versus cases numbers for the US for a couple of reasons. One, states that are controlled by Republicans now, there are probably people who are going to try and downplay the number of cases and or deaths. And the key trick is if someone is poor, they don't go to hospital or they die at home.
Right.
If there's a shortage of tests, you don't actually need to do anything to deflate the numbers. All you have to do is not work hard to get every corpse tested for cause of death.
Right. And that's happening. I mean, that's definitely happening in these early numbers. There's a lot of people who are dying at the hospital, and they just don't waste a test on them.
Sure.
And they're not recorded.
Just to sorry, just to add to that, I'm not going to bash China. They've done the right thing. But we should also take the Chinese numbers with a pinch of salt, because again, whether it's the US or China or someone like Viktor Orban or Putin, the idea that an authoritarian style leader will voluntarily tell negative news and inflate it about themselves is madness. So take a lot of numbers with a pinch of salt.
Yep, I agree.
Just like Donald Trump is doing. I mean, a week ago he thought we were done with the crisis.
Yeah, so then the last thing, it's a couple of things, but I won't take too long. You guys can pick up on whatever you'd like to do on that. There's a journalist I've spoken about before called Gwyn Dyer, who I really respect, and he talked about some things which may not change forever, but they probably will be big changes following on from the crisis. The first thing is that the air in China and India has been clearer and will remain clearer because of the lockdown. And citizens will notice that because it's so stark compared to normal. Having been to Beijing, I can attest that like the air there is noticeably cleaner just in pictures compared to when I went there. And those citizens will probably want that clean air back, which is a huge positive. Yeah. Another big thing that you would appreciate is that what this crisis has really revealed is that austerity is a choice that's ideological and political, as opposed to an economic choice where we don't have the money. Right. We have the money. Right-wing governments around the world have pumped trillions into their economies in response to the crisis and will continue to do so. So, you know, even when business goes back to quote unquote normal, I think a lot of people will realize that, like, for example, London still has homeless people and the hotels are empty because there's no one staying in them. But the country just decided that there would be no homeless people on the street in London anymore. And that was like done overnight. That wasn't something that was in the manifesto of any of the parties to do immediately. So, you know, we've ignored it for so long, but now the crisis happens. We realize, oh, fuck, people who live on the street have multiple health problems. Right. And there's no way they can self-isolate. And they sit outside our corner shops and our supermarkets coughing on people. Jesus, maybe we should do something for these folks. And I think the thing that might flow from that, but you can take your view on it, is that the action around the economy might reveal that actually, if we can deal with this crisis and choose to deal with it, then there's no reason that we can't necessarily choose to deal with the climate crisis. Right. So there are lots of people who haven't gone to work because of the crisis who will now try and remote work. Now, obviously, there's going to be more white collar. When things go back to normal, quote unquote, businesses will try and do business as normal. But I think there are a lot of people who are going to accept, no, sorry, I don't need to go into the office every week for 4 to 5 days. I can come in the one day of the week we actually need our sales meeting or whatever, and I'm going to remote work the rest of the time.
I think that's going to go.
I'm going to leave you there, and you can pick up on that where you want.
Appreciate the call. I mean, I would start with the last one. I think that's going to go both ways. I think there's going to be managers who are going to say, like, I don't need to bring people into the office. Right. And that cuts down on my expenses. I think that's definitely going to happen. The air quality thing, people in LA have been telling me, like, the sky's never been so blue in LA. And so let's hope that there are some things that.
But it's also the white collar workers are the ones who are going to get frustrated and go back into their, likely to go back to their old habits if they have the ability to do so. And I don't know. I mean, I think that this is, on one hand, yes, it's revealed that we have these huge flaws in our infrastructure, in supporting our citizens, and that the neoliberal arguments are completely bogus and bullshit. But at the same time, while this crisis, the immediate crisis, the Band-Aid is pumping money in some ways in other countries, not as much as we need here. It also shows that the crisis is distracting. I mean, in New York State in particular, which is the only state I can really speak on, Cuomo, while the lights are on, is talking about pumping money into the crisis, but when the lights are off, he's trying to balance his budget through austerity.
Yeah,
so
cutting Medicaid.
Distraction. Yeah. So it's also a good distraction, so that what happens, when everybody's focused on this, they can do austerity and other measures. And then of course the consequences are often, when we have these crises, that you have, extreme forms of capitalism and new, financial models that come about as after the crises hit. So I don't know if I buy it entirely that people have woken up to.
I agree with that. And I would also say that, and I think like that same impetus that he started off the conversation with by saying like, you want your leaders to do well. I mean, Orban in Hungary has just been basically, it's like, I'm not sure which episode I just saw, all the Star Wars with Saul, but it was the one maybe episode 1, the fourth one they made, where you just watch the Senate give all the powers to the would-be dictator. That's what we just watched in Hungary, seems to me. But I would add, not only is there situations where there, we should say that Cuomo was trying to cut Medicaid before this,
right,
in New York State, and they're just continuing on with that process. But there was something, this came up in the interview. Nancy Pelosi, there's a lot of different asks that they could get in this fourth phase of the stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
And mark my words, the one that is guaranteed to be in there is going to be a reversal on the SALT taxes, SALT exemptions in New York State and other blue states. Now, this is a situation where in these states, you have high tax states, and the wealthy people in these states would get deductions for paying state and local taxes. And I think, I don't know if mortgage is rolled into the SALT taxes, but just in the state and local taxes deductions, the vast majority, I think you're talking about $70 billion worth of money that is being taxed under this. 40 billion of that goes to millionaires, and the rest goes to people who are making above $200,000. So this is not like helping out the working class or the middle class. I mean, I guess you could argue $200,000 in New York City, but whatever. If you want to make it even, targeted, 40, like well over 60% of this is going to millionaires. I'm sorry, just not. Should not be a priority. If you want to give tax cuts and tax savings, you give it to people who are going to go out and spend it the next day.
That's right.
They're going to buy food. They're going to pay for rent. They're going to pay for utilities. They're going to maybe go see a movie, God forbid, whatever it is. Not at this point, we're going to see a movie, but you know what I mean? Rent one on iTunes, whatever it is. And, there's a whole host of other things that are far more important to put in there. Rick Hasen was talking about, vote by mail.
Yeah.
That would be something, if you're going to, you have a certain amount of political capital, spend it on that to get these tax cuts for wealthy people. Not worth it, but they will sneak this stuff into that bill. And the thing is, like, I wouldn't even have a problem with sneaking in these goodies if there were some other better things. Like, you want to do those tax cuts, the SALT thing, whatever. Get into stop using your chits on that, though.
Yeah.
If you want the Republicans to put that in, and you get in response for it, we're giving $2,000 to people for every month for 6 months or something. Okay, but that is the thing that drives me a little bit crazy, and that is the idea that they're going to sneak in this stuff, and they're going to actually expend some of the political capital to do it, and it doesn't really help anybody.
Well, what's really
wealthy people.
I mean, this isn't happening in Congress. I mean, the argument's being made federally, but in New York right now, Cuomo's also refusing to do rent freezes, and it's mind-blowing because he doesn't actually have an argument. And so activists are bringing this up because he froze mortgages. And so if the argument, was, well, then your homeowners or your maybe it's a small real estate owner who owns multifamily, well, their mortgages are frozen. There's absolutely no argument as to why you don't freeze rents. And if you want to stimulate the economy, this is a consumer-based economy, as you just said, you have to actually stimulate it with the working people that are spending money. So it just doesn't mathematically make sense to me that they're not even willing to budge the tiniest bit on basic necessities in a time of crisis,
This is
especially in
Cuomo
a city like New
screwing.
York.
This is Cuomo screwing the city.
Yep,
That's what
absolutely.
it is.
He's
It's
selling the
screwing
city out.
Yep,
Mhm.
totally. Let's play this clip. This is Rodney Howard Brown. Do you know who he is?
No.
He is a pastor,
Oh.
evangelical pastor, and he has been or he was arrested on Monday on charges of unlawful assembly and violating Hillsborough County's stay-at-home order. This is down in Florida, I believe, right? And he believes that the church is his church is the most sterile building in America
Oh my God.
because it contains machines
Holy oil?
that yes, some type of
Holy
like
water?
holy, I don't know, virus zappers. Let's listen.
The Lord has helped us to secure our congregation. We brought in 13 machines that basically kill every virus in the place. And if somebody walks in the door, it's like it kills everything on them. If they sneeze, it shoots it down like at 100 miles an hour. It'll neutralize it in split seconds. So we have the most sterile building in I don't know, the whole of America. But the Lord.
Yeah, there you are. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he has some ultraviolet machines that sterilize everything.
He looks like the Tiger King.
Highly doubt. Yeah, exactly. I highly doubt it.
What?
I
Oh
know,
my
it's
God.
insane.
It's that movie, Idiocracy, or what is that? Remember that movie?
Yes. Well, we've been there for quite some time.
Yeah.
We've been there for
Full-blown.
quite some time. You mentioned rent freezes.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about that, Naomi.
Oh, I don't?
No, I don't know why you're worried about rent. Donald Trump will take care of it. He knows what's going down. You know, Donald Trump was well known as a landlord to
Great
never
landlord.
harass people for rent. Here's Donald Trump just a day ago saying that don't worry about the rent freezes. Landlords are good guys.
They haven't asked for reimbursement, so I assume they're not. They said they're going to waive them. Waiving them doesn't mean we're going to waive them and get reimbursed, no.
Okay. And second question for you, sir. First of the month is 3 days away. I know these cash payments are coming. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said today about 3 weeks they should get there. For people that are worried about paying rent, I know mortgages through the HUD is taken care of, but I'm just curious about rent. What should people be doing for the first of the month?
Well, they're going to be getting the money. I will tell you, I think landlords are going to take it easy. We may put out a statement on that. I think a lot of people that are owed money are going to take it easy. They don't sort of have a choice. But a lot of concessions are made, just like the insurance companies. A lot of concessions are being made that wouldn't have even been thought of 3 weeks ago, not even thought of. So a lot of really positive things are happening. Please, behind you.
Yeah, he's lying.
Yes, he is, because I have to pay my rent tomorrow.
You didn't get a letter from your landlord saying, don't worry about it?
I did
We'll skip
not.
that?
No, but they are keeping me up to date on how many people have COVID in my building, which is alarming.
Oh, is there a lot?
I live in Queens. Yeah. I mean, it's a number. I don't know what it is in comparison to other buildings, but you know, there's definitely more than 5 cases. So but you know, the one thing I was thinking about is I was reading an article about homeless people right now and how they're not qualifying for the stimulus because they have, you know, many homeless have not paid taxes on the, you know, on the dates that on the years that apply to receive the $1,200. And so, you know, how does that fare into the economy? How does, you know, if you haven't worked in the last year and you're in, you know, you have a partner who has worked. I mean, there's just so many aspects of this stimulus that are not really hitting the people that really need the money to stimulate the economy and to keep us all in a safer place, essentially.
And one of the hard parts is getting people the money. If you don't have an electronic transfer account with the IRS and you got to wait on a check, you could be weeks, if not months out, right? I mean, my understanding is it takes something like a month to process 20 million checks. It could take a while. And you know, part of the, and I don't know if how quickly you could get out cards. But if you had the ability to sort of distribute cards, right, through, I don't know, the post office, and loading up those cards much easier than actually sort of printing the checks, it seems to me. But well, I we'll see. We'll see how quickly phase 4 gets rolled out and if there's any relief there. And I imagine there has to be some type of rent freeze, even if it's sort of, a deferral or something.
I mean, but even that's outrageous. You go 3 months without paying your rent. Suddenly you have to pay, in the case of my apartment in New York, a 1-bedroom, average cost of a 1-bedroom, a little over $2,000. You know, what is that? That's a lot of money for a family, a single person.
I don't know how they work this out. I mean, maybe you defer the rent and then you apply at that point for rent relief. You get 75, 80% of back rent, subsidized by the government. And maybe landlords get a one-time tax credit for what they didn't get back. I'm not sure how it works, but we need to see some imagination here because things are going to hit the wall in a moment. One of the things that caller mentioned about, some of the positives that may come out of this. And I don't know if this is going to be a positive that's going to be lasting on some level, but I think there are going to be a significant number of people who are radicalized, at least in the context of understanding the power that they have. That is a function of their labor. We are seeing more and more sort of strikes and work stoppages. Whole Foods workers are planning, I don't know if they're doing it today, but they are planning a sick out.
Yep.
We saw yesterday, and I don't know how successful it was. I think in some respects, these things, sometimes you need to do them a couple of times before enough people get wind of it. But the Instacart folks basically did a labor action. There is a walkout that was happening at Staten Island Amazon warehouse. Let's check out this. And we should say, as this gets loaded, that Amazon ended up firing one of the organizers of this walkout, claiming that they were firing him because the employee was Chris Smalls. He worked as an assistant manager at the Amazon warehouse in Staten Island. And they said it fired him for repeatedly violating social distancing guidelines and putting the safeties of others at risk. After it asked him to stay home on paid sick leave after he came into close contact with a diagnosed associate with confirmed case of COVID-19. That sounds a little bit suspicious. Let's play the clip of this walkout in Staten Island. It's just quite a coincidence. Now, they have Amazon's confirmed COVID-19 cases in at least 11 of its warehouses.
Wow.
They
in New York or nationwide?
I think nationally. And they claim that they're working hard to keep all employees safe. They just added or attempted to add, I don't know how many they actually did, but they were looking to add 100,000 workers. And if you're going to do that, you have a responsibility to keep them protected. If you have to inhibit how quickly people get stuff, you can change the priorities. I mean, I know that the Amazon supposedly has done that already, but they could do it more. They're looking at this as not a short-term business opportunity. They are looking at this as a way of driving other businesses out of business. They are looking at this as, to achieve their goal of being the marketplace, not being a player in the marketplace, being the marketplace. And they are doing so not just on the sort of like typical exploitation of their workers, which is horrific enough, but they're also doing it on now exploiting their health. I mean, within the context of this pandemic, I mean,
there could be a class action lawsuit. I mean, I'm surprised that no one has stepped up already and decided to sue them for putting them at risk, for handing them one sanitary, one. I mean, listen, they have the goods. It's not like they don't have access to the goods. They have the goods to provide, hand sanitizer that lasts more than a day.
And I would imagine at one point there could be customers who.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I don't know. But certainly it's good to see workers. I mean, this is one of those situations where I think workers in particular are realizing that even in the most dire circumstances, their employers are not helping them.
Right.
That at the end of the day, they are just chattel, that they are just cogs. Here is a construction worker in Ontario. I think I saw this one a couple of days ago. It's unclear exactly who it is, but it's Jack Oliveira. He's a union rep. It's unclear. This is from Friday. It's unclear what spurred this, but towards the end, it looks like he's getting into a fight. Here it is.
Okay. If I lose my job, I lose my job. I shouldn't be speaking like this. But I don't care. I don't give a fuck anymore because I'm scared too. I got an 86-year-old home with oxygen at home. My wife is crying every time I go home because she doesn't know I'm going to kill her father if I have something. Guys, it's in your hands. You decide what you want to do. I heard the electrician walked out. That was their choice. You guys have the same choice to do it. Okay? Let's look out for each other. We don't have 6 feet amongst each other here. When you're in the work site there, you guys don't have 6 feet around you. We're all breathing on each other. Where's your eating facilities? Are they sanitized? You have water to wash your hands when you eat your sandwiches? I leave it in your hands, guys. You guys decide what you want to do. I give you the information. Okay? That man there did not show me the washing facilities in this and he kicked me out of his trailer. He doesn't own anybody. You don't need to be intimidated by that man. He doesn't own us. Wow. Nobody owns us, not even the government. You have a family at home too, eh? You have a responsibility. You have a responsibility. Yeah, you can talk. Because you're scared for yourself. What about these men? They're not scared, right? Where's the washing facilities for these men? They're not here. You have it by your trailer. You want to protect yourself, not these men. Okay? You scared of me. You guys hear it? You guys do what you want, my friend. Okay? You guys do what you want. You scared what I want.
I mean, basically, it's a situation where these guys are on the job site and there's no facilities for them to wash their hands. There's no facilities, there's no masks to protect them because they they can't maintain 6 feet from each other, of course, on a construction site. And the guy's pissed, and I think we're going to see a lot of this as time goes on. People, because this is slow moving in many respects. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of people who are going to realize, like, I'm getting shafted on top of getting shafted.
But they know that. I mean, I think that most workers know they're being shafted by the corporation. So it's like, how do we bridge the divide there between, okay, you're being shafted by the corporation and Donald Trump is protecting them? I don't know if everybody's getting that, and taking it even further, and Joe Biden is protecting them. That's, I think, the failure of our movement right now, we've been trying, but we have to figure out a way of really connecting that tissue a little bit more. I mean, I don't know if Bernie Sanders was able to do that, but these are the people who are becoming radicalized, more and more radicalized, but they also don't have the political power to exercise other than walking out as workers, which is tremendous.
I mean, I think that's, I mean, in many respects, I think that's sufficient for now. Like, I mean, I think ultimately, I'm not as worried about these guys, and these guys are in Canada, obviously, but so it's not, but I'm not as worried about them making the connection from an electoral standpoint at this point. I'm more interested in workers becoming aware of the power they have by withholding their labor.
Sure.
And in many respects, we can help by Instacart's going on strike. I mean, yesterday, my understanding is that Instacart announced like our orders were up 30% from the day before, blah, blah, blah. And that very well may have been true. I don't know, the first time you go out on Instacart strike, I don't know that people know about it. And there has to be education that this is not just about the Instacart workers. It's also about the Instacart customers. Everybody else has to show support to them and basically say, we're not going to do this. And in many respects, it's like, they're, these are two sides of the same coin, and it's building both the awareness in people who work that they have power through the withholding of their labor, through the solidarity with each other and withholding their labor. And then also, creating the sense of solidarity between those people who are working and those people who are customers and using that work or purchasing it in some way.
Right. I mean, the sad thing is that it's not being covered on cable news at all. I mean, it's really, I'm watching CNN every single night. It's very focused on Donald Trump and the Corona task force, but really isn't going beyond that. And so I think, this is a bright spot, but these aren't, for the most part, these aren't activists that are being union organizers. I mean, remember the Uber walkouts? I mean, New York is a union state, and people were paying more attention in New York City when there were Uber walkouts and Lyft walkouts. But at the end of the day, they still have tremendous power because there's no union. And that's in New York, where their folks in politics are even more inclined to support them. So how does that work on a national scale when there's no union protecting them? There's no media to pick up on it other than social media. And the cycle is moving so fast that, in 4 days, folks might forget. Maybe I'm being a pessimist here, but I feel like it needs to be mobilized a little bit more.
Well, I mean, I think so. And I think, we're in a different context, but, it's encouraging to look at what happened with the teachers. In 2018, you had the Red State Revolt. You had at least a half a dozen states, red states, where teachers had no unions. And now teachers are uniquely, I think, positioned to have success in those type of strikes. But more and more, I think, hopefully, it starts with just more awareness of like, these guys on this job site, maybe 30% of them realize like, wait a second, we're getting screwed here. And then they say like, and we're getting screwed like that UPS driver's getting screwed.
Right.
And the UPS driver's like, I'm getting screwed like, those people who work at Whole Foods or, the Instacart or whatever. I mean, I think that's the way that it happens.
Right.
And people seeing other people get screwed in those contexts, I think in some respects clarifies how they're being screwed too, if that makes sense. So
totally. Speaking
of being screwed, here's Joe Biden. He was on with Yasmin I can't say her name, Vasugian. Yasmin on, and this must have been early AM this morning, was it? Or was it over the weekend, Brendan? That was today. Okay, yeah, this is the early show. So or yesterday afternoon. Sorry, I guess different people are filling in. And here's Joe Biden saying that Medicare for all would not alleviate this crisis. Wrong on both ends of this.
I do have one final question for you, because as you've been seeing, our healthcare system seems to be crumbling underneath this crisis. There is not enough. There's not enough support for the healthcare system. There's not enough support for the American people inside of the healthcare system. Are you now reconsidering your position when it comes to single-payer healthcare?
Single payer will not solve that at all. The thing that is needed is, for example, we have a whole number of hospitals that are being so stretched, including rural hospitals, they're going to need more financing. That doesn't come from a single payer system. That comes from the federal government stepping up and dealing with the concerns that they have, the reimbursement that they're going to get, how they're going to be able to move forward, and how they're going to be able to provide all the needed help that are needed in their communities. This is an opportunity to look at reconstructing the healthcare system in a way that, in fact, can respond more rapidly and more effectively to these kinds of crises, because it's going to come again.
Yeah, I mean, he's taking a very, very limited view of this. Yeah. Obviously, yes, hospitals are in need of resources in terms of doctors and ventilators and personal protection equipment, and they need cash to purchase these things to the extent that they're available. But there's two things. One, on one end of it, people may have gone in to see a doctor earlier. You flatten the curve on the front end if they had insurance. We also have an incident of at least one person being turned away, a teenager, because he had no insurance. He died. Mm-hmm. But on the back end, right? Because we've had now, I don't know, the numbers haven't come out for last week, but I would be surprised if the numbers that we get tomorrow or the next day don't show that 7, 8, 9, 10 million Americans have lost their jobs.
Right.
There goes their health insurance.
Health insurance, exactly. As
right?
long as your health insurance is tied to your employment, and we're about to go into the highest unemployment in history. Come on, man.
I mean,
it's a bunch of malarkey.
It's a bunch of malarkey. Exactly. It is about so you have millions of people losing their health care because they have lost their jobs. The anxiety alone is problematic. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do? They're all going to go into Obamacare. They're all you're going to go into Medicaid. I mean, how does this is just a massive undertaking to deal with just the health insurance for these people. And if we had Medicare for all at this point, we wouldn't even be thinking about it. It would be completely off the table. To deal with what the Fed is saying, we could have 30% unemployment. You're talking, I think it's 40 million people, possibly. This is probably on the outside. They're saying that total job losses, I don't want to freak anybody out, but this is what the Fed is saying. 47 million people could lose their jobs. And I don't know how many of them will lose their health insurance on day one. They won't be able to afford Cobra. Cobra is going to be out of, completely nuts. I mean, the idea that you have to figure out on the fly in the midst of all of this,
right?
In the midst of all of it, how are we going to get 47 million people who had health insurance 3 weeks ago? How are we going to get them insurance in a week? If we had Medicare for all, that would just be something you just don't even consider. That's basically like, everybody, I'm trying to think of an analogy, but there is nothing that is this sort of big in our lives. Like, everybody had their own personal stash of toilet paper. So nobody has to worry about toilet paper or it's basically everybody has their own toilet paper and their own, hand sanitizer, unlimited supply in their closets. If we had to take that off the table right now, there'd be a lot of people in much better shape, just in this immediate moment. But this is so much bigger than that. And people are going to die because they lost their job.
So, okay, if we were to look at the math, like the pie chart, the percentage of Americans on Medicare already, then the percentage of Americans that are going to lose their jobs, then the percentage of Americans that are already uninsured or under age tied to their parents. What is the slice of Americans that's actually left insured? And at that point, you have health insurance companies who are going to be losing a shit ton of money. So the argument may not even work anymore for these health insurance companies. I don't see an option at this point for Democrats and possibly even for Donald Trump, but to move to immediate Medicare for all, because we can't process all these people. And the way that we're equipped right now, it's not financially feasible for our economy to do so.
Private health insurance, you're talking probably around 160, 165 million Americans. If it is the case that 45 million, let's say, I don't know, these are all projections, lose their health insurance, lose their jobs and their health insurance. I mean, you're talking about a third of the customer base of the risk pool, right? That is presumably there. I mean, I don't know how that insurance system, I do know how it survives. And it survives because all of a sudden we're going to now subsidize these health insurance. And we could take those trillions of dollars that supposedly are, where would we ever find this money? Now we're just going to give it to the private health insurers.
Right.
I mean,
that's only working with how many Americans? A third of Americans at that point, potentially. So 2/3 of Americans will be forced to go onto some sort of government program. You're already there, guys. We are already almost there with the projected unemployment costs. So think about that. I mean, you want your incrementalism. Guess what? It was just delivered to you on a platter.
Exactly. There it is. People can now decide if they like their private insurance. Boy.
No, and that's the other thing. People are going to get there's going to be a point where people are going to get angry that small businesses are going to get angry that they have to pay for people while so many are being forced to go into government insurance programs.
Yep.
Medicaid and Medicare. And so they're going to say, we can't afford it.
Yep.
We can't afford to keep the lights on and pay insurance for our employees. So either we're laying off our employees, shutting down, or we're not paying for the insurance.
Lastly, let's just do this clip of Donald Trump. He's asked about his statements again. You know, he is doing exactly what he was charged with in the impeachment hearings, which is extorting people who it's his job to provide aid to, essentially. This is being asked by Yamiche Alcindor about this extortion that he's basically been practicing with governors. And here he is denying it. It was a perfect call.
I have two questions. The first is, you've said repeatedly that you think that some of the equipment that governors are requesting, they don't actually need. You said New York might not need 30,000. You said it on Sean Hannity's Fox News. You said
that why don't you people act? Let me ask you.
You said
why don't you act in a little more positive? It's always trying to
get you. My question to you is,
get you. And you know what? That's why nobody trusts the media anymore.
My question to you is, how is that going to impact?
Excuse me, you didn't hear me. That's why you used to work for the Times and now you work for somebody else. Look, let me tell you something. Be nice. Don't
Mr.
be
President,
threatening.
my question is...
Don't be threatening. Be nice. Go ahead.
My question is, how is that going to impact how...
Be nice. I tell you. Be nice.
You used to work for the Times.
Well, he does that every time she asks a question.
Unreal.
It's nuts. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 478 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. This is Jeff from Georgia. Hello there.
Jeff from Georgia. How you doing? Everybody safe?
We'll keep it okay here for the time being. Sam, I know it's grim times, serious times, right? And so if you'll indulge me, I just want to share with you a little bit of vanity. You know, every time I call in, people don't know. You know, I go back and I look at that live chat for the YouTube stream. There's a lot of rumors going around about me, Sam. This is true. That I'm perhaps a little bit inebriated when I call you, perhaps a little bit under the influence. You see what I'm saying here?
Yes. Well, I've been drinking heavily since this morning, so I don't think that's a problem.
You know what, Sam? I'm actually incredibly pleased to hear you say that. Address those rumors. First off, yes. I'm always drunk all the time. I drink nothing but moonshine I make from the finest ingredients that I have stolen. So that's me. But these days, Sam, we got tens of millions of people working from home. And, you know, not all of them are on video conference with the bosses all day. And they have found a way to day drink and do their jobs. They have found a way to indeed partake and any number of mind-altering substances while they procure a paycheck. And Sam, I just want to shout out all those people who are staying safe at home, nice and buzzed. I don't know if any of them work for you or perhaps any other podcast or
there's
fan
times
of,
I ask that
I just
question.
want to say I'm all about that life, Sam. I love that.
All right. Well, I'm glad that you're enjoying yourself. I mean, I certainly thank you, Jeff. I appreciate the call. Party on.
Thank you, Sam.
Let's see. Here is Brendan has just IM'd me. Absolutely not. That's the Brendan Finn promise. Matt, however, does not seem to be. Matt just wrote, what?
I'm drinking coffee still. It's early here. It's 11 a.m. Not quite brunchy yet.
Let's go back to the phones. Calling from a 570 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, Sam. This is Dave from Scranton, PA.
Dave from Scranton. What's on your mind?
I have one question, and I'll take the answer off the air. But first, I just want to say I love your show because you're a realist and you understand how politics work, which doesn't mean you're not a progressive. I think a lot of people seem to forget that. But, I tried to call into my local news radio at least 3 days a week. My local news radio plays 9 hours of right-wing trash.
Wow.
And the people in this county, which gave Trump, PA, repeat it every day. But, and they also play Savage, who I think is also more overtly racist than Trump. But my question is, when I call, I list facts, and it doesn't seem the hosts like that. It seems that they wanted people, who to just give an uninformed opinion. And when I say I give facts about a topic, I don't mean like I'm John from San Antonio, talking about these facts. But I remember your old videos when you used to call into right-wing radio or the Mike Stark videos. I mean, what's your advice on handling, these right-wing, my local right-wing radio stations?
Well, I mean, I think I without the specific context, it's difficult, but the best way to do this is to say one thing. If you, and by that, I mean, like, do not editorialize on either side or even in the, because if you say something like you're a jerk and Donald Trump wants to, okay, so let's say the argument is, Donald Trump is not going to cut Medicaid. And you call in and you want to say there is a lawsuit right now that the federal government is not defending against Republican governors. It's at the Supreme Court where they are attacking the Affordable Care Act, which expands Medicaid. That's all you say. You don't say you're a jerk. You don't say, you don't make any other editorial, because I guarantee you they will go to that.
Right.
And they will say, why are you calling me a jerk? That's the problem with this. Why you sound so emotional? You just do that. And if they want to take you off topic, you just simply say, look, I just called to tell you that. And if you can't answer that, I understand. And that's the way you do it, because really what you're doing is you're not trying to convince them. You're not even trying to convince the majority of their audience. You're trying to convince a small fraction to just ask a question of like, wait a second, why doesn't that host bring that up? That's the best you can do in that situation. I mean, for me, back in the day when I used to call into these shows, just as without even YouTubes or anything like that, I would do stuff like I would check and see what their clock is. And if I knew that they had a hard break, I would call in and strategically try and run them into the post, as we called it, and stuff like that. But the way that you can get on to is always say, I'm a Democrat, but I sort of agree with some of what he's saying. That type of thing always helps you jump the line in most instances. Did you have anything?
I mean, my only experience is arguing with them on Fox News. But I think the point of starting from a place where you agree is really, really helpful in sort of easing your way in, because you also ease in the audience. Exactly. I think the audience starts to like you a little bit more, and they'll say, well, they're a little bit different, and they'll open up.
that is what they call get inside the circle of trust.
Yep.
So you acknowledge some problem or some premise that you think some of the audience has, and then you go from there, because you're basically saying like, oh yeah, no, I have this shared experience, and people go, oh yeah, that's like my situation, and then you provide a different interpretation of it. Let's say
Medicare for All is a great example of that. During the Obamacare wars, you'd start off with saying, you're right, small businesses shouldn't have to pay for healthcare. And, their eyes would open up and they'd say, what? Are you criticizing Obamacare? You're right, Obamacare is flawed. But, here's our solution. What's your solution? Oh, nothing. Okay.
Right, exactly. Calling from 813 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Noah from Tampa, Florida.
Noah from Tampa, Florida. What's on your mind?
So I was looking at the numbers, the COVID-19 numbers.
Yeah.
And I was looking at them and I'm like super confused at why, like, the death rate. I mean, I'm sure it has to do with the fudging of numbers, why the death rates are so different in different countries. Like Italy, they're getting a lot less cases day by day, but they're getting more and more deaths day by day.
Because I can explain this to you. I can explain this to you.
Being overrun.
Exactly.
But
that's what it is. That's what it is.
No, but then I'm looking at like Germany and the United States, and I mean our death rates aren't jumping, but our cases are jumping so much faster than theirs are, which is incredibly scary considering what is happening in Italy, But I was also looking historically, in that the Black Plague, where that hit the worst in the entire world, Northern Italy. And I don't know if I'm like being conspiracy theorist about this, but like, do Italians have have some weird genealogical?
I think it's because they kiss each other 6 times when they see each other.
That's just a joke. That's just a joke. Don't take that seriously.
Well, I mean, look, I think what this is how it is. I think there's a lot of different factors here, right? It is how it's distributed, and what the facilities are in any given location. When you start to see those numbers, what it is you're watching a hospitals get overwhelmed. And, I would imagine in some respects, Italian life is much more social in areas that aren't as, like in New York, life is social because it's a very dense place. And, in much of America, it's not that dense. In Italy, there are areas that are dense. There are areas that are not dense. But even in the less dense places, they tend to be more social. They tend to go out and hang out, on the
piazzas.
Piazzas and there's just more socializing in that respect. And
checking in on the elderly too. I mean, family is in terms of culture. I mean, they check in on their loved ones regularly, and so you're probably obviously the older population was being affected more. But that's not unique to Italy either. I mean, many Southern European countries, Greece's rate is nowhere near that, and
Spain too.
Yeah, well, Spain's affected.
Yep. Well, I appreciate the call.
The other thing, I read this.
Have a great day.
You too.
I read an article a couple of weeks ago, so it's a little bit dated, but there was this data guy somewhere on my Twitter. Someone wants to go back 2 weeks and find it. He wrote a Medium piece, and he's been keeping it updated, analyzing the numbers across the world and here in the U.S. and why the rates were spiking at different times and how it is related to testing and the age demos. But in terms of Seattle specifically, or Washington State, they were only, the numbers that were being reflected was like 50% of people who had COVID were dying, but it was because, of course, not the entire population was being tested. And now in New York or in Italy or in other countries, they're just refusing to test, not just the people who are dying, they're just refusing to test young people and saying, go home. There's no need. We know what the solution is. Go quarantine yourself. So it's going to be interesting case by case to assess this looking back.
It's going to be tricky. Let's go to 920 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is Joe from Wisconsin.
Joe from Wisconsin. Joe, you have a primary apparently in about 8 days for God knows what reason. They're going to have a primary in the middle of a pandemic.
Unreal.
Yeah, it's fun. I already signed up for the mail-in thing because it's nuts out there.
Well, people
Wisconsin's
should do
not
that if
too
you're in
bad
Wisconsin.
right now, but thankfully,
yeah, if you're in Wisconsin,
yeah, it's nuts out there in general.
Yeah.
Okay, first, today is my 40th birthday, so I'm glad I finally got through today.
Well, in that case, let me do this for you.
Thank you kindly.
You're welcome.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Second off, have you heard of genstrike.org or anything on that as you were talking about strikes?
I have not. No.
There's some leftist groups that are trying to get together and essentially contact a lot of the striking organizations and stuff like the IWW and try to set up a sounding board for communications between groups that are striking, and not just labor, but also rent strikes and debt strikes.
Sounds good. You give the URL again.
That's genstrike.org.
All right, genstrike.org.
It's not well developed yet, but it's coming together, and the more eyeballs on it, the more people that go into it, the more interest in it, the better it'll grow.
Great. All right. Well, I appreciate the call, Joe.
Thank you.
We'll keep an eye on that. Maybe
Okay, thanks.
Put that in the plugs and notices. If you have stuff like that, folks, send it to the plugs and notices at Gmail, majorityreporters@gmail.com, plugs and notices in the subject line. And I will read it off during the plugs and notices, and then it will live in the description. And people are checking that out. Calling from an 818 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's Dave from Jamaica. How you doing?
Dave from Jamaica. Dave, you're calling from Jamaica, correct?
Oh.
That is correct.
Why are the phones so much better in Jamaica than everywhere else?
Don't give them too much praise yet. This is one of the better days. I'm surprised the net's not dropping out.
Well, you always sound crystal clear. What's on your mind, Dave?
Well, I guess on my mind today is boomers, because they're a hard group for me to figure out, right? Because as we said, they think Joe Biden is the safe choice due to media and stuff. But it's weird what things they pick up from the media, what they choose not to. And I'm speaking more about left-leaning boomers.
Okay.
So it's like at first they didn't take the corona stuff as serious, and the media has kind of been blaring that all the time. And then when it comes to the media trying to get that particular generation group to hate Bernie, it hasn't worked as much, because even though Joe Biden is winning, they don't hate Bernie. So,
right.
You have any insight to that? Because at the end of the day, we kind of have to figure out how to reach these folks, because they're not going to disappear overnight, as well as reach people who are not active in the process at all. So any insight you want to know me to have?
Well, I mean, my suspicion in terms of Joe Biden is a function of, one, they associate him with Obama. He's a former vice president, and so that is immediately qualifying that there is still more faith in institutions for folks that age, oddly enough, than there is for younger people. They are less concerned with radical change at this point, even structural change, than younger people. So I think it's all those things. I think people want boring politics. At least that cohort of people want boring politics right now. And, some of them may also have memories of the sort of, maybe memories of maybe what the rhetoric was in the late 60s, early 70s relative to what ultimately happened in terms of reform. I mean, there was a lot of progress made but not sufficient, but some in terms of like race and in terms of gender and whatnot. But I think it's all those things.
I think there's
Well,
a
the
hint
reason
of,
I asked, sorry, go ahead, Nomiki.
my only point I would make is I think there's a hint of, it's not the entire older generation, but as they become more stable in their own lives, if they have money, and there is a comparison. People, not all working people, support Joe Biden over the age of 50. The wealthier you are, the more likely you are to be voting in these primaries if you're a Democrat, and supporting the establishment candidate. And I think there's a hint of Joe Biden and the establishment Democrats are cover for people who don't want to face their privilege. They don't think they're Republicans. And I mean, I have friends, very close friends of mine who, it's an anecdote, but they're feminists until it means we talk about Joe Biden's, his sexual assault allegations. They just don't want to face that. They didn't want to face Hillary Clinton being bad on, a litany of issues, because in their minds, she was a feminist, and they would block out all economic arguments. And I don't even think personally they agreed with their economic policies. I just think they didn't want to face the fact that they were very comfortable. They don't want to pay more taxes.
Well, I mean, I think that's part of it, but I don't think that explains, because I think there's like Dave said, there's no hostility in the polling anyways to Bernie Sanders from these people. If you really don't want to pay your taxes and you're wealthy, Donald Trump is your guy.
Right.
And Joe Biden himself is, saying we're going to roll back maybe those tax cuts or whatever to a certain extent. I just think that I actually think what they want is just to be able to walk away from politics. Like, get it over with, get someone in there who's boring, somebody who they're confident can win. And why are they confident that Joe Biden can win? Because all the candidates running against him basically say that he's going to win. All of the establishment figures, all of the media, I mean, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, I don't know. But if you're not an expert at this, I mean, even like, I do this for a living. I cannot sit here and tell you that I am 100% sure that Joe Biden is going to win or lose. Certainly not after last time, but just in the main. And I can't say the same thing about Bernie Sanders. I mean, I can, I have some motivated reasons for it. But if I'm someone who just follows politics in a fairly casual way, which is more than most people, then you're going to have like, you're going to just sort of say like, okay, I will outsource that decision. And now I have also, there's less responsibility that I'm taking because I've outsourced it to them. And that's what that endorsement is all about. Here is what former Hillary communications woman, Charlotte Clymer, says. The country needs a boring president. This country has never been more in need of competent boredom. I need exciting, I'll go out and party with my friends. A boring government that gets the job done is perfectly appropriate and critical in this moment. I think that is an element of it, but I don't, there's a reason why people weren't coalescing around Biden. He was just as boring before these endorsements. I think it's just like, I don't know who's going to beat Donald Trump. That's the most important thing to do. And if all the people who are running in the presidential primary, the vast majority of them say that the person to beat Trump is Joe Biden, then good.
But that's also privilege, though. Think about that. Those are people who are like, there's nothing on the line for them. So they want to go back to having brunch on the weekends and, sitting around and watching Netflix and not freaking out. They don't want to have to be woke 100% of the time and show up and march on the streets. There's fun for a minute, but now they're exhausted.
Well,
there's people who are literally having a health crisis right now need to walk out of work.
Without a doubt. And I think that's definitely within the boring thing. But I think there's a lot of people who are suffering in this context, who are in the similar dilemma where they just they can't assess who is going to beat Donald Trump. And so they have very rationally, based upon where they're positioned, said, I'll trust the other politicians who are running against, who are sitting on that stage. I mean, it's a very rational reaction, it seems to me. And this is also like a very predictable reaction. And yeah, I think the people, I mean, we know this from this, the people who support Bernie are more likely to be supporting their candidate because they agree with the positions than the people who support Joe Biden. The people who support Joe Biden are more likely to say the number one priority to me is not his policies or her policies. The number one priority is that they can beat Trump, and they've outsourced that.
I guess to add further confusion to it, because I see similar things with the boomers, even in Jamaica that I'm around, right? And the reason I'm having so much problems like talking to them in the sense beyond superficially and in politics is because I can't really pinpoint what's driving them. Like I was talking to this lady who's in England. She hates Corbyn, but supports social positions, likes Bernie Sanders. I'm just trying to get the synthesis because like when I ask them what's wrong with Corbyn, they can't really say it. They just don't like him. And I don't know. I don't want to be picking on the boomers, but they seem to be a very emotional generation. Like they're very big on credentials and stuff like that. So I can't figure them out, which is basically what I'm saying.
Well,
and like
not all boomers.
Anecdotes I get, like
hashtag not all boomers,
especially in the South
well, yeah,
Carolina
Dave. I mean,
area.
there's a huge there's a huge generational split. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I don't know how one overcomes that, but I appreciate the call.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Thanks.
It's also interesting thinking about how the establishment speaks to the Bernie voters is sort of generational. They expect you to fall in line because that generation really grew up in an era before institutions massively failed at every single level. So we are less likely as millennials and younger and Gen X to just fall in line and go lockstep and listen to what our commanders tell us to do, because you guys haven't really done a great job of doing so.
I think you're right about that. I think the boomer generation in particular was the last one where you had people who like, I worked at IBM for 30 years. I mean, I think a lot of those people, and I would bet that the people who sort of after 25 years got screwed in the last 10 years of their career by these companies tend to be more probably oriented towards Bernie and by, to the left of the party. But there's a lot of people who are up there as like, and in fact, you could see it with stuff like with, Clinton's reaction to Obama, that, wait a second, it's my turn.
That's right.
That like we have a order in which people ascend. And I think in that generation was the last generation where they, those rules were somewhat adhered to and bought into. And, I think like my generation, there was a lot of people in my generation who I think like never got that opportunity until fairly recently, an opportunity that should have come in their 40s. They're maybe getting now in their 50s on some level because there was no room, because you had such a big generation that was there. But that generation, I think they definitely got this feeling of like, you pay your dues, then you get your rewards. You pay your dues, you get your rewards. And I think your point is right that younger people, they're like, well, like you can pay your dues in this economy and then you get screwed. And there's just simply statistically speaking, but also it's people's lived experiences. There's no upward mobility in the way that there was for the boomers. And so their relationship to these structures and these institutions, like you say, is much more skeptical.
Which, I'm just thinking about the next couple of years and how so say Joe Biden doesn't win, I can see, I'm not buying into this whole Joe Biden's being replaced by Andrew Cuomo thing. Maybe I'm too close to it, really spending a lot of time the last few years studying Andrew Cuomo, but, he's always wanted to be president, probably since he was able to speak. I see him being likely, and I thought this beforehand, not just because of this moment, the nominee in 2024. That's who they're going to push. But I'm really interested in seeing how his personality generationally fits into that. He's not like the kind of guy who forces you to fall in line. He will just wage a war, a flat out, like straight on war against progressives in a very tactical way. And I don't know. I'm curious to see how that plays out in the Democratic establishment 4 years from now, which is, flexing its muscles in every way possible to make sure that we don't have seats at the table. And he is not the kind of person who's going to roll over. He's going to, take us on wholeheartedly and prevent us from having any power in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it's also interesting to contemplate what happens in 4 years if Joe Biden does win.
Sure.
But who knows? There's a trajectory. And I don't know if Andrew Cuomo can stop that trajectory. Maybe he can, maybe he can't. But he's also one of those guys who I think that, like, you're right, he fights that way, but he also seems to, hold his finger up in the air. And if the wind is blowing in the right way, at the very least, he will make some, at least, there'll be some lip service and there'll be some legitimate changes too, I guess. Calling from a 703 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? Oh, this is the final call of the day. I'm sorry, folks. I know
you better tell me I'm on. Is it me?
Yeah, it's you. And you're the final call of the day. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Oh, my gosh. My name is Harsh Malarkey.
Harsh Malarkey?
First time, long time. Michael, I'm a big fan.
Michael's not here.
No, I'm kidding. I'm from Northern Virginia.
Yep.
Matt Christman used a term that people started to use about this place, calling it Raytheon Acres.
Okay.
And I think that kind of really I went to some Bernie canvassing and fundraising events, and people are like, "Where are you from?" And I just say that, and they know exactly what I mean now, which I think is really fitting. Well, I don't know how insightful this actually is, but I have a lot of time on my hands. I kind of run my own dog walking business, and now it's dormant. So I'm just kind of, just biding my time, whatever. And I walk around this neighborhood, think of upper middle class in the national average. And people here, a lot of them are not paying attention to these rules, dude. I was, he's like, it should be okay to walk your dog or whatever, if you're keeping distance, but people will just jog up right behind you. Or I was walking the other night and I came up from this nice little forest path we have in the suburbs here. And I came up to this cul-de-sac near my house, and there was 30 people just standing out in the cul-de-sac, just shoulder to shoulder. Their kids are playing. Kids are walking around in packs of 20. School's canceled until for the rest of the academic year. And people just walk around in groups 20, 30, nothing's going on. It's kind of, you definitely get the impression that people here they just think they're impervious, or they think it's overblown. I don't know. It's bizarre.
That is weird, but I imagine that's going on, in places where they have not been hit hard yet. And that's the one thing. And I appreciate the call, Harsh Malarkey. That was a good point that you made there. And that is our final call. And we will, but let's talk about this. I mean, I think for me, Nomi, this is one of the things that scares me in terms of this thing wrapping up. I mean, I think
right.
I would imagine that, when my kids ask me, when do you think that we're going to go back to school? And I'm like, it's conceivable to me that you might go back in the last week of June and just say goodbye to everybody because the things will be wrapped up at that point. That's possible, maybe not. But I would imagine that at least in New York, things maybe get back to normal around that time. But there's a new normal, a lot more masks being worn by people, just sort of different protocols. Maybe that relaxes a little bit over the summer. Maybe that comes back in the fall. But I get the feeling that this thing is just going to sort of go around the country because of what we're hearing here, and that you're going to need localities to go through what New York is going through. It won't be as dramatic. It's not as dense, not as many people, but they also, the flip side of that, they don't necessarily have the same facilities. And that's the only thing that's going to get people to take it seriously. That's my guess.
I mean, it's crazy because I'm not going to name names, but there are people I've talked to and been around where they think that they're practicing social distancing. They think that they're following the rules, but they're not. It's like the people who think they're progressive, but they're not. You know what I mean? There's a disconnect, and it's exposing a lot about human character and personality and how we process information and how we take that information and put it into action. And it's like the people who talk about something all day long but never actually do it. I think there's a significant chunk of that. And so, I mean, that's the only reason why I can imagine a place like Northern Virginia where fairly educated, tapped in, wired in people would continue to be meeting in groups of 20. You know, maybe they think that they're not, you know, they haven't been around enough people all day long. I mean, I know for one, my family, they're running around shopping all day, and they don't think, because they're practicing social distancing, they don't think that they're carriers.
Right.
But they are. And so I don't know if it just means you're going to have a situation like New York, and how that even looks in a community where people aren't, it's not condensed, it's people are driving all day long, like Arizona where I am. You know, you can see a couple people a day, and that's your entire day. Whereas in New York, you're just constantly around people, whether you like it or not. So maybe it is waves, maybe it's just something we become a little bit immune to over time. I don't know. I mean, can you have it more than once? Do we know that yet?
I don't know if there's been a definitive answer to that question. I don't know, but hopefully we'll know more soon. Yeah, it's pretty nuts. I mean, we'll see. I mean, it's, you know, I've heard different things, that you need a lot of like protracted contact with people to catch it. And it's hard to know. It really is hard to know. And that is part of the problem of, like, you know, with a government that is so been so inept at this, is that we haven't had like the sort of the definitive thing where, you know, somebody comes out and says, look, here are the 10 things you need to know about this. And you can bank on this. It's not going to change every day. And, or even just somebody coming out going like, here are the 4 things that we know for sure. Here are the 5 things that we think, but we're working on. Here's 2 things we have no idea about. Like, you know, you know, I've seen stuff where like people are spraying down boxes that they get, rubbing them down, then using gloves, waiting 4 days, you know, that like you just, and, you know, for me, I err on the side of caution. Because certainly we know that it can survive on these surfaces, you know, so I err on the side of caution, but other people, who knows? But with that said, Nomi, it is time for us to go. It is always a pleasure. Folks, check out the Nomi Keys show. You can see that set in action. You can go to patreon.com.
Does it look okay?
Yeah, it does look. It looks great. Go to patreon.com/the Nomi Keys show or a Nomi Key Const on YouTube. Folks, we'll see you tomorrow.
To get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive.